Welcome to Tea Time, my friends, a place where I muse about my gender transition experience and in the process aim to comfort and inspire others to a greater level of self-awareness. I am Artemis, and this is going to be an ambitious video that will seek to add some dimension to one of the greatest questions that I think has beset us as a species from the moment we gained the ability to recognize that tomorrow is not promised to us, and neither are we assured anywhere of what is beyond. That question is, who are we? Spoiler alert, I have zero intention of intimating that I can actually answer this question for anyone, but if you're curious about how the current social contagion that is transgenderism has something to do with this pondering, and where a character like Dylan Mulvaney fits into this, why don't you have a seat and some tea? Or maybe some whiskey if that's more your cup for such a dive, or whisk tea, maybe. I really hope you like dad jokes. Throughout what seems to be the recorded history of humans, the pattern of attempting to define ourselves has played out time and again, and often we do so in the context of contrasting with other people around us, which makes sense to me. One cannot know or judge what cold is without also knowing what hot is, and vice versa. Without the knowledge of other, it seems impossible to have knowledge of self unless, well, you have the omnipotent knowledge of God. I subscribe to the belief that we did not spontaneously appear like a magician's bouquet, either. I believe we evolved over time, and as such have integrated interactions with others, as well as knowledge of our mortality, into our behavioral biology. So, much of our programming that we might mistake as self is intimately tied to how others may see us, and respond to us, because we are driven to keep these meat suits operating. Without that drive or subsequent religious underpinning, i.e., I believe that I will be punished if I cash in my life chips on purpose, we may not have much of a reason to choose existing if we thought about it, since we have such consciousness to realize that it is indeed a choice until our systems cease to function. Oh, hi nihilism. Not so nice to see you. I see you've invited yourself to the party. Please take your tea to go. Thank you. Since most of us, whether we consciously choose or are simply afraid of the alternatives, continue to inhabit this dimensional reality, sooner or later we may find ourselves trying to define who it is that we are that gives us context, direction, and meaning to life. This seems just to be a condition inherent to existing as a conscientious being. We cannot seem to be comfortable with a degree of not being or a degree of not knowing. Obliteration of self or facing the truth of not knowing in this way seems to decimate many who have ever really attempted the introspection. Some of the greatest philosophical minds were driven to madness, or at the very least suffered severe depression or mental disturbance when they attempted to journey to these depths, such as Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, Heidegger, Socrates, to name but a few. For the average person, though, it seems to me there remains a nagging still to at least functionally answer the question of who they are. And there are many ways in which people attempt to define themselves. There's defining yourself by a career or work that you do, the amount of resources that you possess, the qualities you exude, your family lineage, your physical attributes like skin color or sex, the achievements you've made, the events you've survived, what you've sacrificed in service of others, who you've sacrificed in service of yourself, how many children you've sired or born, what side of an issue of political or moral nature you're on, and so on and so on. The ancient Romans defined themselves by the jobs they did, which we can see on the inscriptions of tombs and catacombs. Today, that legacy is seen in familial last names resembling skilled trades like Baker, Smith, short for blacksmith, Walker, Sawyer, Skinner. Should you be so inclined, you might find it as fascinating as I did to learn just how many names have origins like this, and contemplate your relation to that in a fun way to reevaluate yourself. I did a video about naming yourself, since this is such a big topic within the transgender experience. Link above if you'd like more of a playful topic to chase this whisk tea of a video. So the Romans defined themselves and thus named themselves by what they did. And other cultures, like Arabian, have a practice of defining themselves by a few generations of patrilineage when introducing their name identifier, as well as potentially throwing in a name based on a profession. In tribal African cultures, the measure of a man is in how many cattle he possesses, or in certain Asian cultures, the measure of a woman is in how well she tends to her duties as a housekeeper, wife, and mother. Today, with the leisure time that many more people have, people seem to identify themselves in still more diverse ways, like in the causes they support, or what they like and don't like, though certainly many still define themselves by the expense of the car they drive, or in motherhood, for example. And then, there are people like Dylan Mulvaney. Not content with the typical boxes to which he was ascribed, as a trained actor, Dylan would have been exposed to the more recent schools of thought on acting, which is that you can portray anything you wish convincingly well by assuming a full-time inner world of a character of your choice, as in, try to completely become someone you were not before. Dylan chose to portray a woman full-time, in all forms on social media. This total embodiment of a character is called method acting, and saw the creation of characters like Heath Ledger's Joker from The Dark Knight, Jack Nicholson's Jack from The Shining, and just about any one of Johnny Depp's characters, as I understand. However, the very practice that makes these characters so believable, the total adoption of a persona, is the very thing that can destroy the psyche of the actor or actress portraying them. After having so thoroughly performed another, it's possible to lose what was once thought as oneself, calling into question what reality even is, if one can transplant an identity simply by thought alone. Perhaps many of us would never dream of such a divorce or exploration, firmly rooted in what our sense of self is, and for many, this is a perfectly functional way to operate life. For others, and while the ponderance of who am I has been around for untold millennia, I believe that question is now being explored through the lens of biological sex, because we are peeking at the edge of a level of consciousness which goes beyond the programming that we have had. That is to say, the consideration of sex has informed us on how to think and behave towards others and within ourselves at a very subconscious and primitive level, which we've largely accepted without question. Identifying sex is one of the first things that we do, consciously or not, when we build a profile of someone we've just encountered. It's done because our behavior is wired to identify reproductive potential and threat level in others, based on the average person's ever-present drive to survive. But we are more than our sex as conscious beings, and I believe that in this current era, we are trying to communicate the emerging awareness by breaking down this barrier and experimenting with gender and sex. Dylan Mulvaney is, in my opinion, a manifested version of our current collection of societal and psychological beliefs and highlighted archetypes, following the opulent society mantra of you can be or do anything that you want, pushing the boundaries of what it means to be a man or a woman as an existential question, and riding the initial societal acceptance of the transgender or transsexual individual. He has taken up the experiment of living the other side of the coin, using his training as a method actor. To me, that someone like him would explore this boundary in a performative way makes sense. When it comes to the psychology of personalities, it is often those in the arts and who lean politically progressive who constantly push the limits of what we think is acceptable and are regarded as among the most creative. They constantly ask the question, why not? While their political opposites ask the question, why? They give us potential new solutions to the problems we face, as well as provide a playground for our curiosities. I absolutely believe there's a place in society for this, as it balances out the traditional conservative personality types who favor security in the known. While opinions abound on the implications of Dylan's particular performance and the impact it may have or has already had, I find that the consideration of what this gender experimentation does when explored by the average person who has no training in such exploration, such as method acting, psychological medicine, or philosophical groundwork, to be of far more consequence. Rather than see Dylan himself as problematic or heroic, I find he is simply a convenient package of symptoms to illuminate the themes we are struggling with currently as a society. As I mentioned at the start of the video, the struggle to figure out who we are has been one of the most important questions of the conscious human, and it's in this era that we focus all our attention on biological sex identity in all of its aspects. Those like Dylan ask, why not try to break one of the oldest and most solid boundaries there are? And personally, I think a periodic reevaluation of operation in one's beliefs is in order to keep up with the inevitable nature of the universe, which is change. Creativity without boundary, though, can quickly devolve to chaos, and a fracturing of the psyche can develop by attempting to divorce yourself from biological reality. Outside of the sex binary, as our current biological reality defines it, though, with genitals and chromosomes, there is such degree of fluidity and individual place on the spectrum of one's gender characteristic makeup that you might say there is a degree of unknowing that you will always have, even about yourself. It seems to me that many people cannot be comfortable with a degree of not defining or a degree of not knowing. They feel they must self-differentiate by attempting to define the infinite and make themselves a totally unique individual to feel a sense of worth, and they need the worth to justify their existence, I figure. The irony is that you are already unique by where you are on the spectrum of gender that you reside, among many other things, and defining it does not objectively change that fact. It seems to me that many people need guidelines and to clearly define, or attempt to, as much as they can, and when they cannot, they adopt religion as a structure for their lives and answers to the currently unanswerable. In this age, where parts of the world have experienced a departure from traditional religion, and this lack of structure, coupled with the degradation of traditional boundaries such as sex and gender, I see many suffering in their mental health because they cannot handle just existing without order. And this is no insult to us as humans. It's an observation of affect and effect. Said differently, around and find out. Most people seem to need to put themselves on the map, and without it, there is a sense of dis-ease. We give ourselves complexes simply by existing, it seems, and the realization of the infinite can generate enough terror that on one end keeps deep introspection at bay, and on the other destroys our sense of security. Further, as part of putting oneself on that map, many people really do not know who they are if it isn't in the context of other people. Think about it like landmarks in navigating. If you aren't seeing your position in relation to the McDonald's on the corner across from your favorite store, it may be hard for you to place where you are. In relation to your sense of self, when you're all alone, who are you on your own? And when people face that question, if they begin to peek behind the masks, many of them do not like who they are and what they see either, which is an entirely separate video topic altogether. As a side note, this may also help to explain why transitioning sexes or genders may be so appealing to some people, because they feel it gives them a way to escape themselves. Without the help of a discerning therapist, these individuals end up detransitioning after a period of time when they realize their problems have not been solved by the change. It's like that saying, wherever you go, there you are. While we are more than just our sex, and it does not have to define our identity, it is still something that drives a portion of our programmed behavior and is a part of what defines us. Dylan, and anyone else who displays or displayed in history past gender non-conforming behavior, has given us a study on what it means to be male and female, and masculine and feminine, pushing the boundaries of who we are and who we think we are, and what we actually have control over. A therapist I found on YouTube named Emmy Van Derzen has given talks about how not having an identity gives you freedom, because you're not boxed in by the labels and its expectations. As we've already stated, though, humans tend to have trouble with the unknown and not having guidelines, a bit like a computer without software to tell it what to do. A potential solution to this is in finding a fine balance between declaring a label and then not clinging to it with the fervor of an industrial magnet, or simply just existing, which gives you ultimate freedom and feeds creativity. It helps to defeat that feeling of being stifled, stagnant, and bored, because you've not defined a fence within which eventually becomes a mental prison. Perhaps part of the answer in defining this infinite thing that is the self is in coming to peace with the fact that you are an ever-changing and growing thing. With each experience and each aha moment that you have, your sex is a stable feature throughout your life that will not change, but your expression of traits relating to masculine and feminine may shift over time. This does not necessarily make you transgender or transsexual. It simply reveals to you the vast spectrum of experience within this sector of life. In a culture where many are just coming to understand this spectrum, this realization and shifting can trigger an identity crisis by getting wrapped up in those chosen labels, seeing them from a black and white perspective. Getting attached to these identities so much so that when they're questioned, it tends to evoke a panic response, like an earthquake shaking the emotional and mental foundations. It's one reason I believe why some of those who choose their pronouns and are then misgendered lash out at the offenders. Their sense of control, self, and worldview are being shaken, and this psychologically registers as an existential threat. And this fierce attachment can apply to any label, like what it means to be a woman, for example, given the current social climate around trans women. I believe the attachment is so fierce in part because without all the assumed behaviors and thoughts that come with the label, it removes guidelines for conducting parts of life. Without that instruction and information, it can cause feelings of panic, like being in the cockpit of a plane and expected to fly it when you've never been taught how to fly. In these moments, it forces the exercising of what I consider to be true free will, or pure creativity to express ourselves. I think that's part of what makes people so uncomfortable about those who are gender non-conforming. They're breaking rules of behavior that represent the known, and anything outside of that requires potentially new and novel response. For those of us wishing to flex the boundaries, it may be healthiest to try to find the balance between finding comfort in what identities tell us we should do and allowing ourselves the freedom to act outside of those labels while existing with others who also have that infinite potential of behavior. Without instantly being able to read someone else's mind and the tendency towards selfishness, you begin to see how hard it is to maintain peace, fairness, and cooperation, which is where social boundaries, rules, and definitions become necessary. I've done several videos on this sprawling topic, a few links above if you'd like to visit those islands. I believe that this questioning of who we are through the lens of sex in this gender ideology and transgender movement is a critical moment in the evolution of consciousness. I'm not saying I agree or disagree with any of the claims made by these movements and ideologies or the people within them. I'm simply referring to the fact that we are questioning ourselves in this way. Rather than just looking at the things we do, roles we perform, and possessions we keep to define ourselves, all external facets, we are turning our attention towards investigating what we previously considered to be one of the most fixed aspects of our physical internal selves. While the removal or revision of such foundational principles can lead to periods of chaos and mass formation psychosis, it allows for new standards and foundations to take their place, the ever-present dance between security and innovation. Here, we can both recognize the primitive programs driving our behavior from sex and survival, and also in a sense transcend them to a degree by understanding that it isn't all of who or what we are. Perhaps we can even believe in a portion of us that is eternal, limitless, and exists beyond the reality that our meat suits recognize. Somewhere between that lofty, omnipotent notion and the boxes that we both seek and loathe lay the playground of life, which benefits from both freedom of movement and some general rules for the health and enjoyment of all.